Hi, my name is Dominic. Thank you for the introduction. I hope you can hear me, see me, of course. And I am a freelance art historian from Berlin, focusing on the art and architecture reception and visual world building and storytelling. And doing cultural communications and cultural consulting. I'm a bit nervous. This is the first business presentation of a business conference in this size that I'm doing, so I hope everything will be fine. So you can see my not so professional little picture here and the freelance company name of myself. I'm also doing live action video podcast streams on Twitch about how art and architecture and other cultural aspects are used in all media, especially games, film, and illustrations. So everything visual is what I'm doing, especially when it comes to fantasy and science fiction, which is my other big focus. That's why today I want to talk with you about art history as a discipline that deals and studies visual objects from all cultures and putting them into a context. It's about everything that works visually and aesthetically. So, of course, this is not a new approach for gaming, because video games consist, especially when it comes to the visuality of architecture, of art, it's referencing to different cultures, to different epochs of our history, of our real world, and other elements. But I want to talk about some developments that occurred to me lately, and especially some aspects how art history as a discipline can give you a toolbox, opening new ways of perceiving the visual world building and the visual storytelling through it, and giving you new perceptions, maybe new options to choose from for your world building in general. Yeah, I'm focusing today mostly on open world games, mostly open world fantasy role-playing games, because they are a very good source for examples to talk about. But whatever I tell you today, you can use also for 2D, 3D adventure games, for everything else. I'm focusing on architecture, especially Gothic and New Gothic, because this is something that is used quite often in video games. But you can also use this for every other cultural aspect part of your games. May it be custom design, may it be character design, may it be decorational objects, jewelry, and other elements that work visually. Why am I doing this? Okay, that's my job. But also lately, it occurred to me that we are on a new step for game development. Games are, during the last 10 years, becoming so popular, so big, the technological progress expanded, the resolutions of the games are so high, and therefore also the expectations of the players, I think. I just choose this very nice picture from the castle of Princess Peach from Nintendo to show what happened to the resolution of the castle in some games of Nintendo, to show within 20 years how it changed, the graphics changed, and therefore you need more and more details, of course, when doing a castle like this. Before you saw, you don't need to have so many details to show this, because you couldn't even show it because of the resolution. And now the consoles, the PCs are so good, you need to show more details referring to our world, to our architectural history, to our art history, which is not an epoch, but it's a discipline, but we don't care. So you see, you have to add more details to make it more believable, so people can immerse in, so people can enjoy playing, of course, this. Therefore, we're talking today about the believability from a pure art historical point of view. I'm not talking about gameplay, game design. That's not my level of expertise. I just came from a very awesome presentation from a level designer talking about how to create towns in your games. That was very interesting for me as an art historian to see this part of it. And I want to give you a little overview of some aspects that we could add to the next level of gaming. Okay, what is art and architecture doing as part of a visual world building and storytelling in video games from this point of view? Of course, art and architecture are always telling a story. They are there to give us a point of view on the history. For example, here we have Westminster Palace, which is a neo-Gothic building from the 19th century for the Parliament of Great Britain. It is a representational building, so of course you use a lot of architecture to show it. But in the 19th century you used historical references. Of course you don't build medieval, but it should look like medieval. And this kind of access to how to use architecture is still used in media productions today. It's more about evoking an image, a feeling of history, and staying in a continuation with other aspects. Here the neo-Gothic part should show the power of the parliament coming from the medieval rights, and so it tells a story within this kind of architecture. I'm staying within the neo-Gothic reception today to give you a little red line, because what I'm talking about is a very, very big topic, so I hope it's more clear what I want to say. Of course, the first thing what would be very interesting with the art historical approach on game design, game art, would be giving it history and depth, of course. That's what you want to do when referring to especially architecture, but also using art and other cultural aspects within a game. And I brought some examples that always awed me, made me like, whoa. Here from The Witcher, of course, you're using this kind of church to put it, of course, here in the concept art, into a city to give it a historical feeling, that it's old. Here it's in ruins, so something happened. You give a layer of history to it. Normally, it's connected to the surrounding buildings. It always looks a bit like everything happened at the same time, and then new things weren't added. It gives a certain look of continuation within the world itself, but not so much depth in my perception. The same with other buildings here from Elden Ring, the Storm Whale Castle. That is built in a really, really neo-Gothic-y style to, of course, evoke a certain feeling in the player. A castle is always like something big, something strong, something powerful, should make you feel like, ah, not so good to go there. But normally they are not built in one sitting, in one style like this. So the same also in Bloodborne. History and architectural references can be used to put the player into a certain way of thinking, where am I in time? Here in Bloodborne, using this Victorian neo-Gothic style from England gives you the feeling, I'm in the 19th century. I'm somewhere maybe in Great Britain or something comparable to Great Britain within the second half of the 19th century. Because deep in our mind, in our memory is engraved a certain level of image memory, especially when for Western culture, socialized people, we have a certain knowledge of this kind of stuff, even though maybe you can say, it's 1860, 1818, or 80 or something, that doesn't matter, but we put it into a context because we are so used to see it, to interact with it, and to live in it and with it. I came here to Krakow on Friday already and walked a lot through the city. You can see, of course, the history of the city by walking through it, the different levels of layers of history throughout the history of this city, just walking through the old town and around it, because history gives layers to architecture and therefore for settlements and therefore for a world. So this is also something to have in mind, what art and architecture can do to the players, because I will have some other examples in the end. It builds up, I hope that my red thread is working. That this is a very deep engraved, and we can play with that, we can use that from hundreds of years of the artistic tradition of the last centuries, yes. So this is something I want to show you today. Of course, this kind of usage of architecture in video games is very close to the usage of historical references in the 19th century, where you choose one style to evoke a certain resemblance, a certain connection, but without giving it more historical depth. For example, this is the first neo-Gothic mansion that was built, Strawberry Hills, by a very famous politician and the first fantastic author in the world, Horace Walpole, in the mid-end of 18th century, and he wanted to give a certain medieval feeling. When we build with Gothic, and especially Neo-Gothic, we want to connect to medieval times, but it's also a glorified, romanticized feeling. And there is a certain difference in having a medieval-looking village or a neo-medieval-looking village or town or architecture that you can build. There is a big difference in it that people can see. If it's too sleek, too new, too one theme in it, it gives a certain feeling of this is more a picture, more something, an image, not something to interact with, and something to live in. And has a very different approach on a historical depth of a world building if you use a purely epoch like this here, especially the interior design. It's a different approach on how history and depth in the world building could work. But also, when using art and architecture, you're also using, of course, other cultural aspects that are deriving from hundreds and thousands of years of imagery and art that can have an influence on you. Here, a very awesome side quest I did in Cyberpunk. We streamed about this. I also studied theology as a minor, so this was very interesting for me to connect to how the crucifixion of Jesus is used here, using a lot of imagery from crucifixion pictures, images, paintings over the last centuries, but also having this theological aspect. Of course, creating a believable world also, of course, has to deal with, of course, rituals, with practices that can be taken from hundreds of years as sources, as inspiration, as realistic influence on it, because the more video games become this technologically available and realistic, the more we can take from reality to make it more believable and convincing. That is my main theory, and I think showing some other aspects of this could maybe help. Of course, besides the pure historical references you can use in architectural world building in your game, it's about atmosphere, it's about the look and feel, of course. Bloodborne is also a very good example for this, because using the Neo-Gothic and a little bit of Gothic architecture, you get the feeling of threat, of scareness. I never played it because I'm totally scared of everything that jumps behind something. So I'm always using screenshots and talking with friends about it who played it. But of course, it's not only the architecture, it's the whole scenery with the clouds, with the colors, and so on, that gives you this feeling. But here also, we will talk about this later, it is a pure Neo-Gothic city that fell from the sky. That is the feeling you get when you only use one reference style that has no history. There is nothing in the back. You see the history through the ruins, that something happened, but this is a very small amount of history within using historical references that normally give you hundreds of years, sometimes thousands of years, till you come to the neo-Gothic part. Best example, if you have the time, walk through the old town of Krakow, you see, of course, not only Gothic or neo-Gothic buildings, you see Renaissance buildings, you see Baroque buildings, you see representational buildings that are, of course, very important, but also modern ones. So the layers of history are shown in different styles and different approaches, not only using one style that makes it more to be honest, a little bit, I don't mean it mean, but a bit Disney-like, because Disney perfected that for 100 years, using references like this and making it very romantic. This is where it all comes from, through the movie business, film business, also to the game industry. But now with the open worlds, we can explore more, we want to dive into these worlds, and I think with a certain amount we can, of course, do that. But it's not also only architectural references that we can use here. This is why I'm using some examples at the same time, because it's not only one way and one dimension to look at it. Here we have a very romantic point of view. You see the fog, you see the full moon, working with the architecture, giving you also a romanticized feeling that is coming really from the 19th century. We are still using imagery from this time, especially in our media productions. I use some film examples too, because sometimes they are a bit better to see what I meant. On the left side, you see an very old painting from Caspar David Friedrich, famous German romantic painter. This is the time 1800, 1820s, 30s, that romanticized, that it's coming from nature, loneliness, certain approaches that are still used, of course, as imagery here for the marketing material for Bloodborne, but also in Lord of the Rings to give you this glorified feeling of nature, but also loneliness of the character. You can use this kind of strategies that are within art and architecture, especially in art history dealing with that, for creating atmospheres, feels, looks, how it feels, how it looks. But I think now we are at a time, especially when AI kicks totally in, to give it more than a feeling of this looks like it, it's just an imagery, there is more behind it. That is, I think, now what we can do with this access to so many new approaches and images. The same in The Witcher, we did, I'm doing on Twitch sometimes in-game Touren, tourist tours as an art historian, taking my digital umbrella and leading my chat through open world, and we look at stuff like what you do in a city tour here too, and discussed it, and we walked through Novigrad. Novigrad is an awesome city that is a trading city that has resemblance in the architecture to Amsterdam, Rotterdam, the Netherlands of the 15th, 16th century. So you have the feeling this is a trading city, which is, of course, what it should be. Also fitting into the medieval world of The Witcher. I found in a brothel this reception of a painting from the beginning of the 15th century, mid-15th century, that was very awesome, because I didn't expect that. We really walked only around, and I was like, okay, we're in a brothel, why is there Adam and Eve naked? And I know that painting. We had to learn that in art history as one of the most important reference paintings for our studies. So the usage of real art from our world can, of course, give the player a feeling like, where am I in time? With this kind of stuff, you can always put people in the right mindset. The same with the architecture of Amsterdam and Rotterdam that are known as trading cities, especially in the 15th and 16th century, where Netherlands were big and rich and sending ships everywhere, fitting perfectly to Novigrad. So that is something you can do with this kind of references. This is a real, okay, you have this artwork, this is a Hans Baldung Green painting from the 15th century, putting in there. It's a direct connection, but you can also use this kind of references, this kind of painting style, that technique, to create, of course, your own artworks, giving the certain feeling of time and place where you are. It works with a with an image memory that we have consciously and subconsciously very deep in ourselves. The same, of course, with this romantic scenery. Again, just shortly on the right side this time, another Caspar David Friedrich. He is the only romantic painter I have ever learned. That's why I'm using it, but it's also showing very well where the Elden Ring artists, I think, got some sort of inspiration. You have the church ruin with the sunset, this foggy thingy, to give you a certain atmosphere and feeling. But also, it's sometimes a bit difficult to use, of course, imagery, concept art, and then turning it into a walkable, interactive world. The jump from one media to another is, of course, something very difficult, and a painting works differently because it is frozen in time. It's a bit philosophical approach on the differences of the arts and the media, but a painting is always a story that is told and a feeling that is told or sent to you that is frozen. While a movie brings in the aspect of time, because you can it moves and does stuff with the story, but you're not interactive. You can't do it. The director has to tell you what to see and shows you and does the scenery and everything. So it's sometimes a bit difficult to jump from there, from pictures to movie to games where the interaction is coming. And that is what people love and want to do, of course, interact with the things. So a picture-based approach is sometimes a bit difficult, in my opinion. Also, ending the part about atmosphere, look and feel, an example of illustrations for Magic the Gathering. I love Magic the Gathering because I have 30,000 illustrations I can always take from with amazing artistic approaches. Here, the city of Ravnica is a gigantic plain white city that is shown always mostly in this Gothic, neo-Gothic style that is referred to give you that feeling of a fantasy medieval world. But here, the artist Richard Wright used 4 different ways to give you a certain feeling and atmosphere with the same kind of architecture. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Magic the Gathering, how it works. These are illustrations for the mana lands, giving you the energy to do your spells and cast your creatures. And every color stands for certain aspects of life, of the world, for black, white, red, and green. I'm not going into this, but you feel immediately that these aspects, for example, black staying for decay, death and stuff, white more for healing, for the transcendent, connected to other creatures like angels, while there for black only zombies are there, for red on the down left side, that's of course fire for destruction, that is shown very well here, and green for growing, for plants and everything. So using the same reference, but creating it totally different with the color, with the perspective, changed it. And this is also, of course, coming from artistic concepts and artistic approaches over the last centuries. How he used this with especially the fire one on the left bottom side shows that with this perspective, of course, you can create a totally different feeling of this thing. Even if you take out the fire colors and the red colors, it would be more closer to this feeling than, of course, the green or white one. Of course, talking about persuasiveness and believability, I think in creating a world from this point of view, of course, this is not the only point of view how to create a world. You also have to take under consideration who is building something. Why are they building something? In open worlds, for example, of course, the representational buildings like big churches, big palaces that are also sometimes dungeons are built, of course, by people. They have a background, they have a story, and over not only centuries, but millennia, some sort of these buildings have a certain structure, how they are built, because they should show you, give you a certain feeling, especially representational buildings standing for power, like a palace, but also a church. Again, I'm using not a game example, I'm very sorry, but it's such an awesome reference that I had to use it. It's from Dragon Age, the anime, showing the main cathedral of the main belief in this awesomely built world. And this is where the very influential high priest is living and residing and doing what a high priest is doing. Mostly killing people. And you see their approach is not by referring totally to St. Peter, which has same function in our world, but using the structure. The main cathedral building here in a totally different architectural style that is coming from the French Gothic period, French medieval times, because the whole country where this thing is referring to 14th, 15th century France. But they use the main building, they use the arms of the place holding the believers standing there and cheering to the high priest. You have even this weirdly shaped thing, and the famous obelisk in St. Peter, in not the same position, but it's referring to this and giving you the feeling like, oh, wow, there is a very, very powerful person. And looking at this, I think most of us would immediately think it's a religious building and not, I don't know, a justice palace or a very big bakery. So this is something to take under consideration, that the structures of buildings and the visuality of it, what it does with us, especially as architecture, is rooted in centuries of building stuff, especially religious buildings. That is one of my focus in my research. I'm also doing a PhD in the visuality of architecture in fantasy and science fiction, which is not going so well. But you can also have this with town halls, you have this with justice palaces, you have this with train stations is a bit difficult because they have a new function, which is why I'm using the neo Gothic and the Gothic style also to talk, to show that with new functions that come through Industrial Revolution, new forms of a building have to be found. A train station has a certain function and no one knew how to build it. So they referred by the architectural style to older architecture because it was giving them a certain feeling of safety in times that are changing so much. What do I want to say with this? It's not only the functionality giving the form and the chosen style of a building, but also these strategies, these tendencies over the centuries that are something different. From the talk that I just came from, I saw, I heard the word functionality a lot. Of course, from the game design perspective, I totally understand that when creating this. But it's not only form follows function. This is a very new way of thinking for architectural elements that we have in our world. Before that, other elements were also very present and very important. Sublimity for church buildings. But not only, but also showing power, making feeling people like this is something that you do with architecture when you're building it. Not only how many people can fit in, how many people can see the service, how many people can get into a courtroom. It's also, that's why it's called representational architecture, because this is a new level of not a new level, a different aspect of building these kind of stuff. I am still in the part of Persuasive most. Genau. Here, the capital city in Elden Ring, that is also a very interesting example for thinking this way, like, is it livable, is it plausible, is it believable as a city? This is an awesome city because it's very, it's like an image. You can see the concept art laying in it, under it, where it comes from, but it's not a believable capital city that got destroyed through the story in Elden Ring. When you walk through, you don't get the feeling this was a capital and the king has left or anything. That's based in city planning, that is based on the uniformity of the chosen architectural style. Here it's some sort of Renaissance. It's the overusage of the golden roofs and everything. When you walk through this, it is a dungeon. It was, I think, this is my theory, created as a dungeon to fight and find stuff and so on, but you don't get the feeling that this is a city, or it was a city. We're talking about this in a sec too, just to show this. One of the things how to change that, especially now with AI and AI-generated assets, that could happen. I'm very looking forward to some talks about this here. Could be, of course, variation. Here we had an example for look and feel, but also it gives you the feeling like everything is the same. The city is totally built out of one architectural style. It makes it very unified in some way, and people, players, viewers, readers, whatever, are getting used to something like this if there's no variation very fast. The same here that we saw before. And here, another example from Elden Ring, where you saw this usage of one topic, one theme, one motive that is used for one place in a very interesting way. Here, the academia, where the wizards learn and everything. So they used, of course, Oxford architecture mostly. New Gothic architecture from Great Britain, which is highly connected to university buildings, especially in US, American, and British cultures. That's why it's also called university architecture. And we know this is a place of learning, of teaching, and so on. But this is a very certain way of showing this. And I think it gets very boring at some time walking through and experience this kind of buildings because it's repeating itself very fast. So the same here with the capital city in Elden Ring. Just talked about it, that's why we can skip it a little bit. And just a thing I wanted to say here with variation, within using one style, one motive that you want for your games, there are certain other elements that can be used, like Gothic, here the medieval version of Gothic. There are different areas, different schools, different regions that use the same style because it was the first international style, but can be changed and diversed and variated through this without having too much work and putting money into doing so many different things. Here you see from left to right, this is more or less even historical, the French version, the English version, the German version, and the Bohemian version of Gothic. Same, but different. Giving different feelings, giving different aspects to this, and normally when it comes to AAA productions, no matter of movies or games, the English style is only used, which is highly dominant, but you can change and variate things with using and approaching art historical overviews, for example. Of course, what do we want when we enter an open world? I mostly want my wow effect and a certain way of epicness, which gives an interesting feeling to it, and I love exploring the worlds. I'm not a big fighter in games, more walking around, looking at everything, turning every stone over if I can find something. Sometimes I do. This wow effect is, of course, something that keeps people playing and immersed into your world, and of course makes an interesting game experience. Not only exploring, that's more me, but also you do this with all the aspects of a game. During one of the streams lately, we talked about Assassin's Creed Unity, about the image of Paris in games, but also in movies. And we came, of course, to Assassin's Creed Unity talking about Notre Dame, the famous cathedral. Maybe a lot of you have seen it or have been there. This is a good example of a wow effect that architecture gives you, what I talked before. This other level besides having a functionality. This is a church, this is a big church. People have to come in, the bishop has to talk to the people and do stuff. They are very good in giving you a certain wow feeling. You enter a cathedral like this and stand there like, oh. At least that is the intention of the medieval people building this. In the game, then we watched a walkthrough because we wanted to talk about the architecture, how it's shown here, this Paris image, and we realized that we have a different feeling. Three of us were already in Paris and experienced the cathedral, Notre Dame, so we knew more or less what the feeling of dimensions are. And then watching this walkthrough, we were like, we don't get this feeling. What is wrong in our heads? Why is that? Then we started counting the tiles on the floor between the columns to see if they fit with the original cathedral, and they were right. And then we were like, okay, something is bothering us. Why is it a different feeling of the room, of the wow effect, than in reality? And it's not only the perspective, of course, we are not in one-person perspective, but also the cathedral in Assassin's Creed is smaller by the dimensions. The proportions are right, but the dimensions are smaller. So it's not a gigantic cathedral, it's one of the biggest churches in the world, where thousands of people can fit in. It became a bit smaller and you don't get this wow feeling anymore. Which is why what I want to say with this is to have this experience that we have with real architecture, that we should maybe have this in the process of creating worlds too. Of course, here you have other elements of the game design maybe limiting this, but this wow effect is, of course, they're not happening in the same amount you have in real architecture. So this would be a very interesting connection point. Like every architecture you walk into, especially representational things, do something with you. It's not only like I see the architecture is doing something with you. This sounds very weird. The first time I heard that, I laughed a bit, but then my professor of theology took us to some churches, small, big, very different ones, to get a feeling for the room, for the effect that they have on us, for the wow effect. That's how I call it. He called it phenomenology, which is a theological term. It's more or less about epicness and wow. This is something that I think is now in the next steps of creating believable game worlds, something that can be taken under consideration when building these especially bigger representational things in your games. I got a sign, I couldn't totally see it, but I think I should come to an end. Just a last aspect before ending. I have 7 minutes, I think that's fine. What I meant with this feeling, what architecture can do, is doing to you while you are in the room. I took this image from Sandman, the Netflix show, just to show it because it is also a sacral architecture that is used and referred to and makes it, of course, very epic. Here you get the wow feeling because the dimensions between the people, very small, and the architecture, very big, is a different approach here. Of course, they don't have really to interact with this, but you see the difference just by the size of and the dimensions of the building. And so the the actors get a certain feeling of this, they were filming this in a church. I forgot which one, but they built it here. Of course, most of the stuff is CGI generated in the word. But to give you this feeling, they put the actors in there. They could have done this in a total green screening location, whatever, but because they act differently. You act differently in a room like this than a room like here, or in a office, or in, I don't know, a toilet. Also, we change our behavior within different kind of architecture because the architecture is built to do something with us and change our behavior, how we walk through it, how we interact with people in it. Normally, when you go to the basilica here, people are not screaming, they're whispering more or less. You follow certain ways, even though this was a touristic tour with lines where you are guided. Normally you follow a certain structure within a route within the structure. This is something that would be very interesting to put into consideration when creating the worlds. That was this part. I'm coming to an end and just wanted to show a different way of how art history could maybe be used for game design. It's marketing, because this wow effect and this imagery that we have in mind is used, can be used, of course, for marketing effects. Again, a different medium, but I think you know where I'm going. This is an awesome marketing material for the 4th season of Battlestar Galactica, and they're using, of course, Leonardo da Vinci's famous painting, The Last Supper. Recreating it with the characters from the season. You see the different groups, the tension between them. If you watch the show, and especially the 4th season, you know what it means, but they're using the structure and the conception of Leonardo da Vinci, because it plays with our memory that all of us have with this very famous pieces of art. Even though you're maybe not totally familiar with The Last Supper in general, it's so deeply engraved that you don't even have to say, it's Da Vinci, that doesn't matter. But they're using the structures that Da Vinci invented, here with the betrayal sign, accusation, that's the word, and other things like this, that is, how old is it? 500, almost 600 years, and it's still working because we can decipher this and we can see this, especially as for the Western socialized people. And for my last example, Diablo 4 did a church, that sounds weird, used an abandoned church in France for recreating the feeling, the gothicness of the new Diablo with painting, illustrations, it's not concept art, but something like this for the church on gigantic planes and put it on the walls, using the awe effect or the wow effect or the epicness of this church to recreate the Gothic feeling that you have with Diablo 4. So it is a very interesting, sorry for the blurriness, it's a bit difficult sometimes to find good images, to show that it also works in the other way around, because these concepts, these ideas, these themes that are laying that are inside the art and architecture of the last hundreds of years, thousands of years, work in all ways, and they're not only based in one certain epoch or some certain style or artist or whatever. There are underlying structures and concepts and theories that can help to open new ways of seeing games, and especially visual world building and storytelling through this. I think I am through now, and thank you for your attention.
Do we have any questions? If yes, please enter to the microphone. It's center of the hall.
Hi, thank you for this amazing lecture. I have a quick question, and I will totally understand if you will not like to answer this one, because it's about specific game that you may or may not have played. But it was extremely surprising for me that you haven't mentioned any allusions to Hogwarts Legacy, which seems very similar to stuff you were talking about. So I'm really curious, because you mentioned that in many games they are taking only on of one visual art style, which makes it maybe simpler, maybe it gives wow effect, but it's not so realistic. How do you think, what was good or what was bad in Hogwarts Legacy Hogwarts?
The problem is I haven't played it. I saw a couple of videos so far, but I didn't have a chance yet. That's why it's a bit difficult to talk about that, to be honest. I did a stream about the Hogwarts architecture in the movies, but I think that is, of course, something different in the way they approached the architectural world building. That's why I'm a bit... I can't answer that.
No, okay, I thank you very much, anyway.
Hi, thank you for your talk. I'm wondering about giving more examples in games industry that are more positive than negative. Do you have some? Because we are talking about really flat cities, and me as a developer, and recently I made a big city, and we needed to cut a lot of content because of optimization and memory and consoles, basically, and we couldn't add as much different architectural and as much variation as we wanted. So I'm wondering, do you have some positive example when someone managed to squeeze everything that it's believable enough?
Of course. I hope it didn't sound too negative. I don't want that that this is a feeling you get, that I'm highly criticizing something. This was more the way to I think, show the points that I wanted to make. Of course, there are awesome world buildings and creations that I saw. I loved Dragon Age. Dragon Age is a very good example for creating an IP and a world that is really deep. I loved it also because of the theological aspects, which is always interesting, but also the world itself, the places shown are very interesting and awesome to explore. The different castles, the different styles. The capital is totally different in the style than other places. You see that there is a lot of thought put in how to create it, how it works, especially with this religious aspect. I'm referring to Dragon Age 3 in my head. I always use the little Kirkwall church as an example for other academic talks, because it's so well made and thought through. That would be a very good example.
Thank you, great. It was what I was looking for. Thank you.
Hey, great talk, thanks. I hope I won't be drifting too much away from the architecture, which was the main thing you were talking about, but you also brought the examples of Caspar David Friedrich, very good ones, and I like them. And it sparked a question in my head, because it happens in games, but not a lot, that you come across fine art references. And also working with a client or art director, fine art references are not super common. What I find being the most used references is movie references or other game references. Why do you think is that? And is it maybe because we assume that the target audience won't get it, or it's already, I don't know, too late to use it? Because, for example, the cinema is still using it heavily, and the game industry is not so much. Or maybe am I playing the wrong games?
I think that it's a big problem. As I'm also doing research on fantastics in all media, I can tell you I might be worldwide one of 3 art historians diving into new media, and for us, new media includes photography, which is only 150 years old, movies, and of course games. I think there is no connection between this, and a lot of stuff coming from the movie, the film industry is, I think, because there's more connection points to what is seen as high culture, high art, and especially the German art history that I had to suffer under, is not talking about new media. I had a talk with our what is it in English? Verband, where all the art historians of Germany are connected, and they were like, "Are you doing video games?" That they didn't spit on me was the only thing that was left, and I think there can be it could be a very good resource for game developers to dive into that too, as reference materials, as inspiration, as seeing things maybe different, and having a new certain perspective on creating those worlds. It's not the only one, of course, and I don't think it's the best, but I think it would add something new and give you more opportunities and chances to look into that. And I'm not sure why it didn't happen. I think the connection between film industry and game industry is way stronger, and of course they are the ones that are successful and make money, and people like playing it. Going to a museum is not so well liked. I know the cultural stuff in Germany, which is horrible. They are very snobby, and they don't want to deal with that mostly. So that might be something.
Thank you.
Okay, we are run of time, so thank you, Dominic.